She stood 5 feet 7 inches in Louis Vuitton heels, holding a briefcase worth more than the federal agent's annual car payments. He saw a target. She saw a defendant. When Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Blaine Whitaker decided to profile Brielle Kane in the lobby of a Texas courthouse, he didn't just make a mistake. He signed his own professional death warrant. He demanded her papers, convinced he'd caught an illegal. He didn't realize he was barking orders at one of Houston's top civil rights attorneys. What started as racial profiling ended with a $15.4 million gavel strike that shook the Department of Homeland Security to its core. This is the story of how arrogance met the law, and the law won. The heat in Houston was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed down on the shoulders of anyone foolish enough to step outside the air-conditioned sanctuary of the Harris County Civil Courthouse. But inside the marble-floored lobby, the air was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax and anxiety. Brielle Kane checked her watch, a vintage Cartier tank that had belonged to her grandmother. She was early for her hearing with Judge Alana Voss. Brielle adjusted the lapel of her navy bespoke suit. She didn't dress for fashion. She dressed for war. As a black woman in the upper echelons of Texas corporate law, she had learned early that her appearance had to be armor. There could be no loose threads, no scuffed heels, no hesitation. She moved toward the security checkpoint, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm against the stone. She was running through her opening statement in her head, focused entirely on the complex intellectual property dispute she was about to litigate. She barely noticed the man leaning against the pillar near the metal detectors. Blaine Whitaker noticed her, though. Whitaker was a veteran of ICE, a man whose career had stalled out in middle management and whose bitterness had calcified into a dangerous sort of arrogance. He wasn't even supposed to be conducting field stops in the courthouse lobby that day. He was there to transfer custody of a detainee involved in a separate criminal case. But Whitaker was a man who prided himself on his instincts. He liked to tell the rookies at the bar that he could smell a status violation. What he actually smelled was his own bias. He watched Brielle approach. He saw the dark skin. He saw the high cheekbones. He ignored the suit, the briefcase, and the confidence. In his mind, the narrative was already written. He'd seen women who looked like her cleaning the offices upstairs or pleading guilty in immigration court. He didn't see a peer. He saw a quota. Brielle placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. It remained silent. She stepped through to collect her things, offering a polite, tight nod to the court security officer, a man named Deputy Gonzalez, whom she'd known for years. "Morning, counselor," Gonzalez said, sliding her tray forward. "Morning, deputy. How's the grandbaby?" Loud. Gonzalez chuckled. Brielle smiled, reaching for her bag. That was when a heavy hand clamped down on her forearm. The touch was sudden, aggressive, and entirely uninvited. Brielle flinched, her instincts flaring, and ripped her arm away, spinning around. Blaine Whitaker stood there, chest puffed out, his ICE badge hanging around his neck like a talisman of absolute power. He was chewing gum, his jaw working slowly, aggressively. "Don't walk away when I'm observing you," Whitaker said. His voice was loud, designed to carry. It was a tactic: establish dominance, create a spectacle, make the suspect freeze. Brielle stared at him, her eyes narrowing. She didn't freeze. She calculated. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly calm. "You just put your hands on me. Identify yourself." Whitaker smirked. He loved this part, the feigned indignation. "Agent Whitaker, ICE. I've been watching you since you walked in. You look nervous." Brielle almost laughed. "I'm not nervous, Agent. I'm annoyed, and I'm late for court. Step aside." She turned to grab her briefcase handle, but Whitaker stepped into her personal space, blocking her path. The lobby, usually a hum of low conversation, began to go quiet. People stopped scrolling on their phones. A few heads turned. "I didn't say you could go," Whitaker barked. "I need to see some identification, proof of citizenship, now." Brielle froze, her hand hovering over her leather bag. The sheer audacity of it momentarily stunned her. She was standing in a federal building, wearing a $2,000 suit, greeted by name by the security staff, and this man was asking for her papers. "I just went through security," Brielle said slowly, turning back to face him fully. "I showed my bar card and my ID to the deputies. If you have an issue, take it up with them. I don't care what you showed the rent-a-cops." Whitaker sneered, glancing dismissively at Deputy Gonzalez, who was now watching the exchange with a furrowed brow. "I'm federal, and I have reasonable suspicion to believe you are in the country illegally." The silence in the lobby was now absolute. "Reasonable suspicion," Brielle repeated, the lawyer in her taking over. She squared her shoulders. "Based on what, Agent Whitaker?" "Articulate it. Is it my gait, my attire, or is it the fact that I'm a black woman existing in a space you think I don't belong in?" Whitaker's face reddened. He wasn't used to suspects using words like articulate. He stepped closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mint. "Don't get cute with me, sweetheart. You fit the profile. We've had reports of illegals using fake credentials to access the courts. You want to do this the hard way? I can slap cuffs on you right now, and we can sort this out in a holding cell." Brielle looked at Deputy Gonzalez. The deputy looked ready to intervene, stepping around his podium. "Agent Whitaker," Gonzalez said, his voice warning. "That's Miss Kane. She's a—" "Stay out of this, Gonzalez," Whitaker shouted, not looking away from Brielle. "This is a federal immigration matter. She's refusing a lawful order." He looked back at Brielle, his eyes cold. "Last chance. Papers now, or you're going in cuffs." Brielle took a deep breath. She felt the heat rising in her chest, the ancestral anger, the personal humiliation, the rage of 1,000 slights culminating in this one moment. But she forced it down. She needed to be ice cold. "You are making a mistake," Brielle said softly. "A career-ending mistake." "The only mistake," Whitaker growled, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "Was you thinking you could walk into my country and act like you own the place?" The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting open was like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. Brielle didn't resist physically. She knew the drill. She had defended enough victims of police brutality to know that any movement, even a flinch, would be documented in Whitaker's report as assault on a federal officer. If she wanted to destroy him, she had to be the perfect victim. She had to be impeccable. "Turn around," Whitaker commanded, grabbing her shoulder and spinning her roughly. "I am complying," Brielle stated loudly for the benefit of the dozen cell phone cameras that she could see rising in the periphery. "I am not resisting. I am a United States citizen and a licensed attorney in the state of Texas." Yeah, tell it to the judge," Whitaker muttered, yanking her wrists behind her back. He clicked the metal cuffs tight, too tight. The cold steel bit into her skin, pinching the delicate nerves of her wrists. "These are excessively tight," Brielle said, wincing. "I'm requesting you loosen them." "Standard procedure," Whitaker said, enjoying the power trip. He pushed her forward, marching her not toward the elevators, but toward a side room often used for temporary detainment. He wanted to parade her. He wanted the people in the lobby, the other lawyers, the clerks, the clients, to see her humbled. As they walked, Deputy Gonzalez was frantically speaking into his radio. "We have a situation in the lobby. ICE agent has detained an attorney. I repeat, detained an attorney. Need a supervisor down here. ASAP." Whitaker ignored him. He felt the adrenaline pumping. This was a good caller. She was too polished, too arrogant. Definitely high-level cartel connection, he reasoned. Maybe money laundering, fake identity. He'd be a hero back at the field office. You have the right to remain silent. Whitaker began to drone, reciting the Miranda rights with a bored familiarity. "I know my rights better than you do, Agent." Brielle cut him off. "And I am invoking my right to counsel immediately. Furthermore, I am informing you that you have detained me without probable cause, violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You have also profiled me based on race, a violation of the 14th Amendment. Every second I am in these cuffs increases the damages in the civil suit I will be filing against you personally." Whitaker laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. He shoved her into the holding room and kicked the door shut, isolating them from the witnessing crowd. The room was stark, cinder-block walls, a metal table, 2 chairs. He spun her around and pushed her down into a chair. She couldn't break her fall with her hands, so her shoulders slammed into the backrest. She gritted her teeth against the pain. "You talk a big game," Whitaker said, pacing in front of her. "Civil suit, Fourth Amendment. You memorized that from a Know Your Rights pamphlet." He leaned over the table, placing his hands flat on the surface. "Here's the reality. I run your prints. They come back with nothing, or they come back with a match to some visa overstay, and you're on a bus to the border by tonight. You think a suit and a fake accent protects you?" "My accent is from Houston," Brielle said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Born at Methodist Hospital, raised in the 3rd Ward, law degree from UT Austin." "We'll see," Whitaker said. He pulled out a mobile fingerprint scanner from his tactical vest. "Give me your thumb." He grabbed her hand, forcing her thumb onto the glass plate. The device beeped, processing. Brielle watched him. She saw the sweat beading on his forehead. She saw the moment the doubt started to creep in. Just a fraction. He was staring at the device, waiting for the red light, the no match, or the flagged alert. The device beeped again, a cheerful green chirp. Whitaker frowned. He looked at the small screen. Subject identified. Kane, Brielle A. Citizenship, USA. Status, clear/no warrants. He blinked. He tapped the screen as if it were broken. He swiped down to see the details. Occupation, attorney at law. Bar number, 2498112. The silence in the room changed texture. It went from tense to heavy. Whitaker stared at the screen for a long time. "Machine's glitching," he muttered. "Signal in here is crap." "The machine is fine," Brielle said. "And now you have actual knowledge. You have official confirmation of my identity and citizenship. Every second you keep me in these cuffs is now false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, official oppression." Whitaker looked up at her. The arrogance was wavering, replaced by a flicker of panic, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Not yet. He had gone too far. If he released her now, admitted he was wrong, she would own him. He had to find something, anything. "The ID could be synthetic," he said, grasping at straws. "Identity theft. It happens all the time." "You are digging a hole to the center of the earth, Agent," Brielle said. "I have a hearing in Judge Voss's court. If I am not there, the judge will send a bailiff to find me. When they find me handcuffed to a table by a rogue ICE agent, what do you think happens to your pension?" Whitaker slammed his hand on the table. Shut up. I ask the questions. You sit there until I verify you manually. He turned away, pulling out his radio to call dispatch. He needed a supervisor to authorize a deeper search. He needed to find a reason. Drug residue on her bag, a discrepancy in her background, anything to justify the stop. But before he could key the mic, the door to the holding room burst open. It wasn't a bailiff. It wasn't Deputy Gonzalez. It was a man in a charcoal gray suit, looking disheveled and frantic. It was Harlan Reed, the senior partner at Brielle's firm. He had been in the lobby, seen the commotion, and had been trying to get through security when Gonzalez waved him through. "What the hell is going on here?" Harlan roared. Whitaker spun around, hand drifting toward his holster instinctively. "Federal agent, get out! I don't give a damn who you are!" Harlan shouted, stepping fully into the room. He pointed a shaking finger at Brielle. "That is my partner. That is one of the most respected litigators in this city. Uncuff her immediately. She's under investigation for identity fraud." Whitaker lied, his voice cracking slightly. "Identity fraud." Harlan looked at Brielle, then back at Whitaker with a look of pure incredulity. "I've known her. I was at her law school graduation. You incompetent. You have no idea what you've done." "Step back, sir," Whitaker warned, but he was backing up himself. The walls were closing in. "Harlan," Brielle said, her voice cutting through the shouting match. "Check the time." Harlan looked at his watch. "Go to Judge Voss's courtroom," Brielle instructed calmly. "Tell her I am being detained by Agent Blaine Whitaker against my will. Tell her I am unable to appear. Ask her to issue a writ of habeas corpus immediately, and—" "Harlan." "Yes. Ask her to come down here herself." Whitaker's eyes went wide. "You can't summon a federal judge." Brielle smiled, a full, shark-like smile. "Judge Voss isn't just a judge, Agent Whitaker. She's my godmother, and she hates bullies." Whitaker looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Harlan, who was already turning to run out the door. He looked at the fingerprint scanner that still glowed with the words, "Citizenship, USA." For the first time, Blaine Whitaker realized that the predator in the room wasn't the man with the badge. It was the woman in the chair, and she was just getting started. Blaine Whitaker stood paralyzed in the small holding room. The silence that followed Harlan Reed's departure was deafening. He looked at the woman handcuffed to the metal chair. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. She was staring at a spot on the wall. Her breathing even, composing herself like an athlete before a championship game. "You're bluffing," Whitaker said, though his voice lacked the bark it had earlier. "Judges don't come down to the holding cells for traffic stops." "This isn't a traffic stop," Brielle replied, her eyes finally locking onto his. "It's a kidnapping." Minutes ticked by. Whitaker paced. He pulled out his phone, thumbs flying across the screen, texting his supervisor, trying to frame the narrative before the storm hit. Suspect uncooperative. Possible ID theft. Situation escalated by third parties. He needed backup. He needed someone to tell him he was right. Then he heard it. It started as a murmur in the hallway outside, a ripple of sound that grew into a wave. Then came the distinctive rapid-fire click of heels. Not just one pair, but a phalanx. The door to the holding room didn't just open. It was flung wide with such force it banged against the concrete wall. Standing in the doorway was Judge Elena Voss. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet 2 inches, with silver hair cropped close and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. But in her black judicial robes, which she hadn't even bothered to remove, she looked 10 feet tall. Behind her stood 2 U.S. Marshals, hands resting on their weapons, and a pale-faced Harlan Reed. "Unshackle her," Judge Voss said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was the low, terrifying rumble of an approaching earthquake. Whitaker swallowed hard. "Ma'am, Judge, this is a federal investigation. I have jurisdiction here. You can't just—" I said. Voss stepped into the room. "Unshackle her now, or I will have these marshals arrest you for contempt of court, obstruction of justice, and unlawful imprisonment in my courthouse." Whitaker looked at the marshals. They weren't looking at him with professional solidarity. They were looking at him like he was a dead man walking. One of them, a burly man named Marshal Donovan, gave Whitaker a subtle nod, a silent, "Do it, or I will take you down" signal. Whitaker's hands shook as he reached for his key. He fumbled, dropping it once before managing to insert it into the cuffs. The mechanism clicked. Brielle pulled her arms free. She didn't rub her wrists, though they were marked with angry red welts. She stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt, fixing her jacket. She looked at Whitaker, then at Judge Voss. "Thank you, Your Honor," Brielle said formally. "Are you injured, Counselor?" Voss asked, her eyes scanning Brielle's wrists. "I have sustained soft tissue damage to my wrists and shoulder," Brielle stated for the record. "I was also forcibly profiled, detained without probable cause, and denied access to counsel despite immediate invocation." Judge Voss turned her gaze on Whitaker. It was a look that had made hardened cartel bosses weep. "Name?" she demanded. "Agent Blaine Whitaker, ICE Field Operations." "Agent Whitaker," Voss said, pulling a notepad from her pocket. "You have just interrupted a federal court proceeding by detaining an officer of the court. You have done so based on zero actionable intelligence, purely, it seems, on the color of her skin. You are aware that Miss Kane is lead counsel on the Vertex case." I didn't know who she was," Whitaker stammered. "She fit a profile." "A profile?" Voss's eyebrows shot up. "A black woman in a suit. Is that the profile for illegal activity in your manual, Agent?" "She refused to show ID," Whitaker argued, trying to regain some ground. She was combative. "I was asserting my constitutional rights," Brielle corrected him coolly. "Rights you swore an oath to uphold." Judge Voss snapped her notepad shut. "Marshal Donovan, escort Miss Kane to the courtroom so we can salvage her case. Agent Whitaker, you are not to leave this building. I am calling the special agent in charge at the Houston field office. He and I are going to have a very long conversation about your profile." "You can't detain me," Whitaker bristled. "I'm on duty." "Get out of my sight," Voss hissed, "before I find a reason to put you in a cell that locks from the outside." Whitaker grabbed his gear and stormed out, pushing past the marshals. He looked furious, but underneath the anger, Brielle saw the terror. He knew he had messed up. He just didn't know how bad it was going to get. As the room cleared, Brielle looked at her wrists again. The red marks were turning purple. "Brielle." Judge Voss's voice softened, losing the judicial edge. "Are you okay?" "Really?" Brielle looked up. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold tremor in her hands. "No, Elena, I'm not okay. I've worked my whole life to be seen as a lawyer first, and in seconds he reduced me to nothing. Just a suspect." She clenched her fists, fighting back tears of rage. "He did it because he thought he could. He thought I was nobody." "He was wrong," Voss said, placing a hand on Brielle's shoulder. "And he's going to learn exactly how wrong he was." Brielle looked at her godmother, her eyes hardening into flint. "I don't just want him fired, Elena. I want to burn the whole system that made him. I'm going to sue him. I'm going to sue ICE. I'm going to sue Homeland Security. and I'm going to do it in the most public way possible. Go get him, Tiger. Voss smiled grimly. But first, you have a patent case to win. The lawsuit Kane versus Whitaker et al. Hit the federal docket like a meteor. Brielle didn't just hire a lawyer. She built a dream team. She brought in Ronan Fisk, a civil rights shark from New York known for bankrupting police departments, and Serena Landon, a forensic discovery expert who could find a deleted email on a server that had been melted down. The initial response from the government was standard: dismiss, delay, deny. They claimed qualified immunity for Whitaker. They claimed he acted in good faith. They tried to argue that the courthouse lobby was a border functional equivalent zone where Fourth Amendment rights were suspended. But Brielle wasn't playing defense. She went on the offensive. We need his history, Brielle told her team in the war room of her firm. Whitaker isn't a rogue apple. He's a product of a rotten tree. I want his personnel file. I want his disciplinary record. I want his emails, his texts, his internal memos. I want to know every single person he has stopped. The discovery phase was a bloodbath. The government fought every subpoena, citing national security and privacy concerns. But the judge presiding over the civil suit, Judge Donovan Brooks, a strict constitutionalist who had no patience for government overreach, granted almost all of Brielle's requests. Into the suit, Serena Landon walked into Brielle's office carrying a hard drive. She looked like she had just found the Holy Grail. You're going to want to see this, Serena said, plugging the drive into Brielle's laptop. What do we have? Whitaker's emails? Better, Serena said. We have the group chat. She pulled up a series of logs from an encrypted messaging app used by Whitaker and a dozen other agents in his unit. It was a digital locker room of bigotry. Brielle leaned in, reading the messages. Her stomach turned. Whitaker? Bagged another 2 at the bus station. They make it too easy. Agent K, did you check papers or just go with the gut? Whitaker. Gut never lies. If they look like they mow lawns, they probably don't have visas. Whitaker. Heading to the courthouse today. Going to see if we can spook some of the illegals trying to get marriage licenses. Easy pickings. My God, Brielle whispered. This isn't just profiling. This is a sport to them. Spooking people at a courthouse. Keep scrolling, Serena said. Look at the date of your incident. Brielle scrolled down to the date of her arrest. Whitaker. Spotted a live one. Fancy suit, expensive bag. Probably a cartel girlfriend or a mule trying to look legit. Going to shake her down. Agent Miller. Careful, Blaine. Don't step on toes. Whitaker. Watch me. These people crumble the second you show a badge. She'll be begging me to let her go. He planned it, Brielle said, her voice trembling with fury. It wasn't a split-second decision. He saw me, he judged me, and he decided to shake me down for entertainment. There's more, Serena said. We cross-referenced his stops with the ICE's official logs. Whitaker has conducted over 400 field interviews. 98% of them were people of color. Of those, only 12% actually had any immigration issues. He's been harassing citizens and legal residents, and his supervisors signed off on every single report. Brielle sat back. This was the smoking gun. This was the evidence that would pierce the shield of qualified immunity. This proved malice. He didn't just profile me, Brielle realized. He's been terrorizing the city, and nobody stopped him. She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the Houston skyline. Ronan, she called out to her lead litigator, who was working in the next room. Get the press release ready. We're leaking the chat logs. Leaking? Ronan asked from the doorway. No! Brielle turned around. We're amending the complaint. We're not just suing for damages anymore. We're filing a class action, and I'm adding a charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights." She looked at the screen where Whitaker's words glowed in hateful green text. "These people crumble the second you show a badge." "He wanted to see me crumble," Brielle said softly. "I'm going to show him exactly what happens when these people fight back." The next day, the story broke. The Houston Chronicle ran the headline, "Texts Reveal ICE Agents Sport of Racial Profiling." CNN picked it up by noon. It was on every major network by dinner. Blaine Whitaker's face was on every screen in America. But Whitaker wasn't done yet. Cornered animals bite, and he had one last desperate card to play. He wasn't going to go down alone. He decided to go on a podcast, a right-wing fringe show known for defending patriots, to tell his side of the story. He thought it would rally support. He thought it would make him a martyr. Instead, he was about to hand Brielle the keys to the kingdom. Blaine Whitaker sat in the cramped, soundproofed studio of the Front Line, a podcast hosted by Brock Slade, a shock jock known for his inflammatory rhetoric and fierce defense of what he called traditional enforcement. Whitaker had been advised by his union rep to stay silent. The Department of Homeland Security's lawyers had issued a gag order, but Blaine Whitaker was a man who believed his own press. He was convinced that if he could just explain himself, man to man, patriot to patriot, the country would see that he was the real victim here. He adjusted the oversized headphones, leaning into the microphone. He looked tired. The months had been a slow-motion car crash. He had been placed on administrative leave, his gun and badge locked in a safe he couldn't access. His neighbors had stopped waving. "So, Blaine," Brock Slade's voice boomed in his ear, "they're painting you as a monster. They say you targeted this woman because of her race. What's the real story?" Whitaker cleared his throat. "It's ridiculous. Look, I've been on the job. I've caught terrorists. I've stopped traffickers. You develop a sixth sense. When I saw her in that lobby, something felt off. She was too rehearsed, too perfect. In my experience, people who try that hard to look legitimate are usually hiding something." "And the chat logs?" Slade asked, lobbing a softball. "They say you called it a sport. Locker room talk." Whitaker scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "We deal with the scum of the earth every day. You got to blow off steam. It doesn't mean I don't follow the law. This is just a liberal lawyer trying to make a name for herself by destroying a working man. She thinks because she has a fancy degree, she's better than the guys holding the line." He leaned closer to the mic, his eyes narrowing. "Honestly, I think she planned it. I think she came into that lobby looking for a fight. She baited me, and now she wants millions of taxpayer dollars. It's a shakedown, pure and simple." The podcast aired live. Within minutes, clips were circulating on X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. But Whitaker had miscalculated the audience. He hadn't just insulted Brielle Kane, he had insulted the intelligence of every listener. By claiming a black woman in a suit was baiting him simply by going to work. He had stripped away his own defense of reasonable suspicion. In her high-rise office, Brielle watched the clip on her tablet. Ronan Fisk, her lead attorney, sat across from her, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. Did he just admit on a recorded broadcast that his sixth sense is basically just resentment of successful black people? Ronan asked. He did, Brielle said, pausing the video. He just destroyed his own good faith defense. He admitted he targeted me because I looked too perfect. He's practically testifying for us. The fallout was immediate. The Department of Justice, which had been tentatively defending the civil suit, suddenly went quiet. The next morning, a courier arrived at Brielle's firm with a sealed envelope. It was a settlement offer from the government, $5.5 million, no admission of wrongdoing, a standard non-disclosure agreement. Brielle stared at the number. It was generational wealth. It was enough to retire on. It was the easy way out. "They want it to go away," Harlan Reed said, looking over her shoulder. $5 million is a serious offer, Brielle. Most people would take it and run." Brielle picked up a pen. She didn't sign the document. She flipped it over and wrote 2 words in thick black ink. "See you." "Send it back," she told the courier. "You're rejecting it?" Harlan asked, stunned. "Brielle, trials are risky. You never know what a jury will do." "This isn't about the money, Harlan," Brielle said, standing up and smoothing her blazer, the same navy one she had worn the day she was detained. "Whitaker thinks this is a shakedown. He thinks I'm doing this for a payout. If I take the settlement, he gets to go on believing that. He gets to retire quietly with his pension and tell his buddies at the bar how he almost got her." She walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse where it had all happened. "I want him in the box," she said, her voice turning cold. "I want him under oath. I want him to look me in the eye and explain to a jury of his peers why he thought I didn't belong in my own country. I'm not settling for money. I'm settling for his badge." The refusal of the settlement sent shockwaves through the U.S. Attorney's office. They had assumed Brielle Kane was a rational actor who would take the cash. They didn't understand that for Brielle, the law wasn't just a profession, it was a religion, and Blaine Whitaker was a heretic. Before the trial was set to begin, the twist that Brielle's team had been hoping for walked through their front door. He was young, with a buzz cut and nervous eyes. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit quite right. He told the receptionist he had information about the Kane versus Whitaker case. Ronan Fisk brought him into the conference room. Brielle sat at the head of the table. "I'm Agent Hayes," the young man said, his hands shaking as he clasped them on the mahogany table. I was on the text thread, the one you released." Brielle nodded slowly. "I remember. You told him to be careful. Don't step on toes." "I tried to warn him," Hayes said, his voice barely a whisper. "Blaine, Agent Whitaker. He was my training officer. He taught me everything. But he taught me wrong." Hayes looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. He kept a book, a physical notebook. He called it his trophy list. Every time he deported someone or got someone to self-deport out of fear, he'd write it down. But he'd also write down the ones he just harassed, the ones he scared just for the power trip. He gave them points. The room went silent. "Points?" Ronan asked, leaning forward. "Yeah, like a game," Hayes said, looking sick. 5 points for a construction worker, 10 for a nanny, 50 for a professional, doctor, lawyer, engineer. He called them unicorns. He said breaking a unicorn was the ultimate high, because it proved that no matter how high they climb, they're still beneath us. Brielle felt a chill run down her spine. "Does he still have this book?" "He thinks he destroyed it," Hayes said. "He burned a bunch of stuff in a trash can behind the field office the day the lawsuit dropped, but I saw him drop it. He didn't check the burn barrel. He just walked away." Hayes reached into his bag and pulled out a charred, water-damaged black moleskin notebook. The cover was melted, but the pages were legible. "I pulled it out," Hayes said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I was scared. But then I heard him on that podcast, lying, acting like a hero." Hayes slid the notebook across the table. "I can't be a part of this anymore," he whispered. Brielle opened the book. The smell of smoke wafted up. The pages were filled with scribbled dates, descriptions of people, and tallies. Indian doctor, Memorial Herman parking lot. Shook, cried, 50 points. Hispanic architect, downtown. Tried to quote laws, cuffed him for 20 minutes, 50 points. And there, on the last used page, was the entry for that morning. The big one. Black female, suit, lawyer. Going to be a 100-pointer. Let's see if she breaks. Brielle closed the book. She looked at Hayes. You just won this case, Agent Hayes, she said softly. But more importantly, you just saved your soul. The federal courthouse in Houston was besieged. News vans from every major network lined the streets. Protesters marched with signs reading, "No one is illegal," and "Justice for Brielle." A smaller group of counter-protesters stood on the other side holding signs that said, "Stand with Whitaker and law and order." Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was suffocating. Judge Donovan Brooks, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor and brilliant legal mind, presided. Blaine Whitaker sat at the defense table. He looked diminished. His suit was expensive, likely paid for by a legal defense fund set up by his podcast supporters, but he wore it like a costume. He wouldn't make eye contact with the jury. Brielle sat at the plaintiff's table flanked by Ronan Fisk and Serena Landon. She looked regal. She wasn't just a victim today. She was the prosecutor of her own trauma. The government's lawyer, a weary-looking assistant U.S. attorney named Vance Harlan, tried his best. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harlan began, "this case is about a mistake, a regrettable, unfortunate mistake made by a dedicated officer in a high-stress environment. Agent Whitaker is not a villain. He is a human being who made a judgment call that turned out to be wrong. But being wrong is not a crime, and it certainly isn't worth $15 million. Ronan Fisk stood up for the plaintiff. He didn't use a podium. He walked right up to the jury box. "This was not a mistake," Fisk said, his voice low and dangerous. "A mistake is forgetting your keys. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. What happened to Brielle Kane was a hunt." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "We will show you that Agent Whitaker didn't stop Ms. Kane because he suspected a crime. He stopped her because he resented her existence. We will show you that he treated his badge not as a shield to protect you, but as a weapon to hunt for sport." The trial moved quickly. Deputy Gonzalez testified about Whitaker's aggression, describing how Brielle had been calm and compliant, while Whitaker had been manic and hostile. Then came the video evidence. The security footage from the lobby didn't have audio, but the body language was undeniable. The jury watched in silence as Whitaker physically blocked Brielle, grabbed her arm, and then marched her away like a prisoner of war. They saw the crowd watching. They saw the humiliation, but the defense held the line. On cross-examination, Harlan got Gonzalez to admit that ICE agents have broad authority and that he couldn't know what Whitaker was thinking. He could have seen something you didn't. "Correct?" Harlan asked. "I suppose," Gonzalez admitted. The defense case relied entirely on the subjective fear doctrine, that if Whitaker believed there was a threat or a violation, he was protected even if he was wrong. Then came the turning point. The plaintiff calls Agent Declan Hayes to the stand. A murmur went through the courtroom. Whitaker's head snapped up. He stared at his former rookie, his eyes wide with betrayal. Hayes took the stand. He was terrified, but he held his ground. Under Ronan's gentle questioning, he described the culture of the unit. He described the trophy list. "Objection!" Harlan shouted, standing up. "Hearsay. Relevance." "It goes to motive and malice, Your Honor," Ronan countered. "It proves this wasn't an isolated mistake." "Overruled," Judge Brooks said. The witness may answer. When Hayes described the point system, the 5 points for a construction worker, the 10 for a nanny, the 50 for a professional, the jury looked physically ill. One juror, an older white woman, covered her mouth with her hand. Then Ronan introduced Exhibit 44, the charred notebook. Whitaker's face went white. He slumped in his chair, realizing that his cleanup had failed. Ronan read the entry aloud. The big one. Black female, suit, lawyer. Going to be a 100-pointer. Let's see if she breaks. He looked at Whitaker. She didn't break, did she? Agent Whitaker. The climax. Whitaker on the stand. The defense had no choice. They had to put Whitaker on the stand to explain the notebook. It was a Hail Mary pass. Whitaker walked to the witness box. He tried to look confident, but his hands were shaking. Harlan led him through a soft examination. The notebook. It was just a way to blow off steam. Right. Cop humor. Dark humor. Yes, Whitaker said, his voice raspy. It's a stressful job. We see terrible things. You make jokes to survive. It didn't mean I wasn't doing my job. And when you stopped Miss Kane, did you honestly believe she might be in the country illegally? I had a suspicion, Whitaker said. She fit certain indicators. Thank you, Harlan said. Your witness. Ronan Fisk stood up, but he didn't walk to the podium. He turned to Brielle. Your Honor, Fisk said, Miss Kane will conduct the cross-examination. The courtroom gasped. It was highly unusual, but perfectly legal. Brielle was a licensed attorney representing herself as co-counsel. Brielle stood up. She walked slowly toward the witness box. For the first time since that day in the holding room, she was face to face with Blaine Whitaker. But this time, she wasn't in handcuffs. She was in control. Agent Whitaker, Brielle began, her voice deceptively polite. You testified that I fit certain indicators of illegal status. Could you list them for the jury? Well, Whitaker shifted in his seat. You were evasive. You avoided eye contact. The video shows I was looking at my watch. Brielle said, Is checking the time an indicator of illegal status? No, but your walk. You were walking fast, trying to bypass security. I went through the metal detector, Brielle corrected. I greeted the deputy by name. Is knowing the security staff an indicator of illegal status? It was the whole package. Whitaker snapped. You looked out of place. Out of place, Brielle repeated. She stepped closer. I was wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. I was carrying a Toomey briefcase. I was in a courthouse where I have practiced law for years. What exactly about me was out of place? Agent Whitaker. Whitaker stayed silent. He knew the trap. If he said black, he was dead. If he said nothing, he looked incompetent. Let's talk about the notebook, Brielle said, holding up the plastic bag containing the charred evidence. You wrote, Let's see if she breaks. What did you want me to break into, Agent? It was a figure of speech, Whitaker muttered. Did you want me to cry? Brielle pressed. Did you want me to beg? Did you want me to admit that I was lesser than you? I wanted to verify your status. You had my ID. Brielle's voice rose, echoing off the wood paneling. You had my bar card. You had the biometric scanner result that said U.S. citizen. And yet you kept me cuffed. You kept me in that room. You told me these people crumble when you show a badge. Who are these people, Blaine? Criminals? Whitaker shouted. Liars. People who scam the system. And when you looked at me, Brielle said, leaning in, her face inches from the plexiglass shield. Did you see a citizen, or did you see a score? Did you see 100 points? "I saw a threat," Whitaker yelled, losing his composure entirely. "I saw someone who thought she was better than everyone else just because she had money. You think you can just walk around with your nose in the air? This is my country. I protect it. You people are just guests." The courtroom froze. You could hear a pin drop. Whitaker's eyes went wide as he realized what he had just screamed. "You people are just guests." Brielle stood back. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked satisfied. "No further questions, Your Honor." The jury deliberated. It would have been shorter, but they had to fill out the damages form. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged engineer, stood up. He didn't look at Whitaker. "In the matter of Kane versus Whitaker et al., we find the defendant, Blaine Whitaker, liable for violation of the Fourth Amendment, false imprisonment, and malicious prosecution. We find the Department of Homeland Security liable for failure to supervise and civil conspiracy. We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $2.4 million. And the foreman paused, taking a deep breath. "We award punitive damages against Blaine Whitaker and the Department of Homeland Security in the amount of $13 million. Total, $15.4 million. The courtroom erupted. The gavel banged. Whitaker sat alone at his table. His lawyer was packing up his briefcase, already distancing himself. The trophy list lay on the evidence table, the final nail in his career. He looked across the aisle. Brielle Kane was hugging Agent Hayes. Then she turned and looked at Whitaker. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the balance of the universe had been restored. She picked up her briefcase, the same one he had profiled her for, and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking that same sharp, authoritative rhythm. The law had won. The verdict didn't just make the evening news. It rewrote the manual on federal law enforcement accountability. The $15.4 million judgment was the largest individual payout for an immigration profiling case in Texas history. But the money was secondary to the message. You are watching us, but we are watching you back. For Blaine Whitaker, the end came swiftly and brutally. The Department of Homeland Security, desperate to distance itself from the PR nightmare of the trophy list, didn't wait for the appeal. They fired Whitaker days after the verdict. He was stripped of his badge, his gun, and his pension. Because the jury had found him liable for malicious and intentional conduct, the government refused to indemnify him for the personal punitive damages. Blaine Whitaker, the man who once bragged about breaking unicorns, was now broken. A local reporter found him. He wasn't in a federal office. He wasn't on a podcast. He was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse on the outskirts of Houston, scanning barcodes on packages. It was a cruel irony. His life was now defined by the same repetitive manual labor he had once sneered at. One rainy Tuesday, Whitaker was leaving his shift, waiting at a bus stop because his truck had been repossessed to pay legal fees. A police cruiser rolled slowly past. The officer inside slowed down, eyeing Whitaker, a disheveled middle-aged man in a hoodie standing alone in the dark. The cruiser stopped. The lights flashed. "Hey, buddy," the officer called out, stepping out of the car. "You live around here? You look a little lost." Whitaker froze. He felt that familiar knot of panic in his stomach, the same panic he had inflicted on thousands of others. For the first time, he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. He realized with a sinking heart that to this young cop, he was just a suspect. He was just a profile. He lowered his head, pulling his hood down. "Just going home, officer," he mumbled. "Just going home." For Brielle Kane, the victory was never about the lifestyle the money could buy. She didn't buy a yacht. She didn't buy an island. She bought justice. After the check cleared, Brielle stood at a podium in front of the Harris County Courthouse, the same spot where Whitaker had slapped cuffs on her. Beside her stood Agent Hayes, who had resigned from ICE and was now studying for his LSATs, funded by a scholarship Brielle had created. Today, I am announcing the launch of the Kane Voss Civil Rights Initiative, Brielle told the crowd of reporters. We are taking the $15.4 million awarded by the jury and dedicating every cent of it to providing top-tier legal defense for those who cannot afford it. We will be the shield for the people this system tries to crush. The crowd cheered, but Brielle wasn't looking at the cameras. She was looking at the courthouse doors. She remembered the humiliation. She remembered the fear. But mostly she remembered the moment she decided not to crumble. She picked up her briefcase, the same vintage leather one. She turned to Harlan Reed and Judge Voss. "Ready for court?" Harlan asked. Brielle smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "I was born ready." As she walked up the steps, the security guard stood a little straighter. Deputy Gonzalez smiled and tipped his cap. And in the lobby, the air felt different. It didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled like change. Brielle Kane walked through the metal detector, the beep signaling she was clear. She didn't look back. She had a case to win. And that is the incredible true story of how one arrogant agent messed with the wrong woman and paid the ultimate price. It's a powerful reminder that in the face of injustice, knowing your rights and having the courage to stand your ground can literally change the world. Blaine Whitaker thought he could break Brielle Kane, but all he did was forge her into a weapon against corruption. What would you have done in Brielle's shoes? Be honest. Would you have taken that $5.5 million settlement and walked away to a quiet life? Or would you have risked it all to put Whitaker on the stand and expose the truth? Let me know your answer in the comments below. I really want to read your thoughts on this one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please blast that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story about karma hitting back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.